You might recognize our guest today, Glenn Koenig, as a resident of Arlington, the man in a dress that you see around town. Glenn has a long history in Arlington, especially with ACMi. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with ACMi?
Well, I volunteered for the old ACA way back when cable first came to Arlington in 1980, 1981 timeframe. And because of some issues with the contract with the cable company later on, we lost our studio in Arlington completely, and because the town and the cable company didn't agree about where the studio should be. And a bunch of us got together and started meeting in the basement of the Fox Library saying, this is ridiculous. So over the years, we put together sort of a rough committee in a way and had meetings and finally came to the point of understanding we had to do something because the next contract deadline was approaching. So the thing that I did, I think that was most key to it all, was point out how little time there really was between where we were, which is 2002, 2003, and the end of the contract in 2005. And I said, look, you got to forget, nobody's going to meet in the summer. They're not going to meet during the holidays. They're not going to meet while town elections are going on. You've got 5 months to do this. And people were like, oh my God, okay, we're going to have to get in action. And so in a way, I kind of lit a fire. But after, and then they said, all right, you be the president. So I was like, okay, I'll be the president. Which wasn't president of anything except a whole lot of meetings for a long time. 2 years worth of pretty intense meetings about trying to get the town to approve the whole concept, trying to put together a nonprofit, trying to convince the Board of Selectmen and so on, work with the Cable Advisory Committee, which had to deal with the actual contract with the cable companies, and by then there were 3 of them. And in order to get our full 5%, we had to conduct a study of the town to show that it was beneficial to the town. Just a whole lot of work had to be done. And finally, we went on the air and, well, on the wire, so to speak. I guess there was a slight delay, so it was like 9 months after that contract. And I stepped off the board then because I had other things I wanted to do. And I thought, what I've done here is I've done my part. I've made my contribution.
Yes, you have. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
doing that,
Yeah.
because we wouldn't be here today
Yeah.
if it weren't for that hard work that got done. One of the things that you decided you wanted to focus more time on was yourself and getting to know yourself more, which is where the book A Man Wearing a Dress may have begun.
That's true, and that was kind of going on, the beginnings of that were going on in parallel to doing the work on the ACMi board in the early O's, when I was just beginning to try out certain things and go to certain places where I felt safe, which was not out on the street in Arlington, because it was just too scary. And I was too uncertain about what I was really doing. I couldn't really know what my own future was. I just had to do things one step at a time and then check in with myself and say, how did that go? What it seems like the next step? And kind of make it up as I went along.
Were you writing during that time, or was the book something that happened
Sort
after
of
you
yes
had put
and
the
no.
pieces together?
Well, let's put it this way. I didn't have a book in mind. I've always written a lot in my journal. I probably have written over 1 million words in my life. Just, once the computer got invented and I could own one, I've been writing up a story ever since in a private journal and, emails to people and letters to the editor and op-ed pieces and what have you. And I even got paid to do some writing for Video Maker magazine for a little while, to write articles for that. And I was writing for myself, and I also wrote and produced a lecture, which was recorded, and I still have to get that off the old computer it's on, about my predictions for the future, what I thought was going to be happening after the Y2K panic was over around the year 2000. And so that was an ongoing process, but there wasn't any concept that I would write a book until 2014. Everything before that was writing lots of other things. And I think that helped because I had a lot of practice just writing. Good stuff, bad stuff, whatever, and seeing what came out of me.
And so what's in the book, people will find, is since 2014. Or did you go back into your journals and pull from that?
I didn't actually have to go back and read my journals much. The book actually starts when I was born, back in 1950. So I began there because I thought, well, there's certain little things in my life that kind of were foreshadowing over what has happened. And I also realized I just wanted to write certain stuff without realizing what exactly the purpose was going to be or how it was going to fit into the final book. And I finally realized that being raised male had certain, they call it, white privilege or male privilege or whatever. There was definitely that. I have all that privilege. I'm tall, I'm male, I'm light-skinned, I grew up middle class, Protestant background, all that kind of stuff. At the same time, there were a lot of things that I think got missed, and I thought I should bring some of those things out about how you get channeled, your emotions are stripped from you in a way, you're bullied on the schoolyard in a different way perhaps. I ended up being sent to boxing lessons. I ended up getting drafted. These are all things that happened to boys and men that didn't happen to women. And so I'm not complaining and saying, oh, woe is me. I'm just trying to point out there's no great bargain necessarily, depending on what you were born with. There are going to be struggles. And those struggles, I thought, made sense to show a background of who I really was before I came to this. So you can kind of see in your own way what I was, where I came from, what I was made of, and so on, to the best of my ability to put it in. I mean, if I wanted to write about my entire childhood, the book would be 8 volumes or something like that, so I couldn't do that.
Yeah. You were going through a change that you weren't quite sure where it was going to take you.
That's right.
So you were a little uncomfortable showing it to the world yet. As you sort of went through your journey, did you see Arlington changing in a way that made you more comfortable being a part of the community in the way you were developing your own sense of being?
That's really hard to say because I think Arlington's probably not unique in that changes have been going on culture-wide about diversity in general. And my little corner of the diversity world was proceeding in my life. And meanwhile, discussion about diversity, respect for diversity, and sort of the spreading out of information, whether it's racially or gender-based or what have you, has been moving forward very rapidly. I mean, when I first started to think about these things back in 2001, let's say, in all earnestness, the internet was good enough to do the kind of searches I wanted to do, there was no same-sex marriage rights in any state. And that didn't happen until 2004, and by 11 years later, it's everywhere. Mm-hmm. That's, in terms of social change, that's dramatic.
It is.
And what that did was not just say, oh, these people can now get married. It said it was a legitimizing step for gay people in general. And it had an impact on the rest of society and gay people as well, because marriage is a long-standing institution. So when a lot of gay people were faced with marriage, there was suddenly this question of like, oh, well, now that I can do that, I'm not so sure.
Hasn't worked out so well for the rest of you.
Right, yeah. So, but a lot of people have, Mm-hmm. And what I was doing was I had to push my own boundary one little step at a time and to say, okay, I'm way back in the early O's, I'm going to start carrying a purse. And I'm going to see what it's like to wear nail polish. That's a very light color, so people won't even notice that I'm wearing it unless I say, oh, by the way, I'm wearing nail polish. Can you see? And I did that kind of thing for a while and just began to move that process for myself forward, thinking that perhaps I was trans, thinking that perhaps I was going to eventually decide to live life as a woman full time, and maybe even take hormones and all the other things that you are available now technologically. And that's one of the real cruxes of the book, was to understand and discover for myself that that isn't exactly where I was headed after all, and kind of left me out in space going like, okay, now what? I don't fit these fixed categories that people seem to be talking about. So what am I? Who am I? What do I do now? And all that while was expanding the places I would go in a dress or a skirt or anything else that was considered traditionally women's clothes, little by little, from the sort of safer places that I identified as safer for where I felt safer. And not that I was going to be attacked necessarily, but just kind of, all those things that you worry about. Am I going to be shunned? Are people going to whisper behind my back? What's going to happen? And so, I'm a member of the UU Church in Arlington Center, and so one of the things I did was go to church in things that I wanted to wear, because I knew that was an accepting place to do that. And I remember one day I went to church and I walked in, and my friend Rachel was handing out the order of service, and I said, I'm afraid I'm a little bit overdressed. And she leans over and she says, there's no such thing as being overdressed for church. And I was like, oh, good, okay. And she's right,
Yeah. And she put you at ease.
And it put me at ease.
That this
it
was
helped.
a place of safety. Do you see yourself on a local level as any kind of role model? Do you feel that you are someone that can be approached for younger people who have questions?
Well, I was volunteering for a number of years with the Unitarian Universalists as an adult advisor to what are called senior youth ministry programs. And now senior meaning senior high school. In other words, from 9th grade through 12th. And I did that for like 8 years or whatever. And most of the young people in that program didn't come right out and say, oh my God, this is just amazing, you've changed my life. I mean, that didn't necessarily happen. But a few of them said a few things, and then I got an impression after a while that the biggest thing was just being me in a way that was confident and grounded and just out in the world. And I think that helped a lot of people. I haven't had a lot of interaction. I kind of wound that down last year because I was really getting ready to publish a book, and I had to cut back on my volunteer hours that I was putting in. So I haven't really had a chance to go into a place where there are a lot of young people, such as a school or some kind of after-school program or whatever, and really get a better read on what help I might be giving. But I hope so anyway.
But your confidence in who you were was being interpreted by these kids as they can be confident in whoever they are, not so much if it's a sexual orientation or if it's a
gender identity or whatever.
Or, I'm a geek and I embrace it. But just really saying if you're confident with who you are, that's what takes you forward.
Yeah, and I know that. I mean, I'm just one person doing this, and I may be pretty unusual on the streets of Arlington or Cambridge or wherever I go. But on the other hand, I know there are a lot of other examples of people who are saying, okay, there's Lady Gaga and there's all, Born This Way, all that kind of thing going on out there in the culture, and I'm proud to be part of that. But I know I'm not spearheading it. I'm just being me, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm adding to the chorus, essentially.
And being you seems to have given you a very positive outlook on life, which is another thing that you talk about in the book. The book talks about your positive...
My optimism.
future.
And I'm not always optimist. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and I look at the news headlines or whatever and I go, oh dear. But one of the things that you don't necessarily see just by looking at the cover of the book is that starting way back in the late 90s, before the big Y2K thing happened, I really began to think about the sense of optimism we had in the 1950s and early 1960s, where we thought technology was going to make a wonderful, amazing, astounding future for everybody. We were barely even going to have to work anymore.
Or eat or cook.
Yeah, or whatever, well, eat maybe, but certainly, labor-saving devices were going to revolutionize life and things would be just great. And then a whole lot of stuff happened, and by the time we got close to the year 2000, and people, the year 2000 was held up as a, the future, and then we were about there, and it was like, this doesn't look anything like what people thought. This is not the Jetsons. This is not all that stuff. And I started to think about, okay, what is it? What's really happening here? And I began to look at the underlying sort of structural changes and issues going on that I thought were actually behind a lot of what people were seeing, both wonderful things and very disturbing things. And of course I had an ego like any writer, and I'm thinking, oh, well, I know what's going on. And then I had to stop and say, well, for most visionaries, maybe you have a 50-50 chance. Maybe I'll give myself a 60-40 chance. I don't know. But I know that there are a lot of things that I thought that probably aren't going to come out the way I expect them to. And if people come to me and they say, oh, well, if you're a visionary, how come you're not filthy rich because you picked all the right stocks in the market and whatever? And I'm like, no, that's not exactly how it works. I'm sort of an amateur student of sociology, if you want, or cultural shift. And I see a lot of bad behavior out of people who are actually probably relatively good people, but it's easy to blame people when you see the bad behavior. And my take on it is, I don't think blame is very useful for anybody. And that's one of the important themes in the book, is blaming somebody a lot of times doesn't really fix anything. And a lot of times what you see somebody doing is a result of something that's not visible, and you have to kind of dig to go underneath all of the surface headlines and tweets and whatever's going on now and say, all right, how have certain fundamental changes in culture been a factor in making this stuff happen? How has, one of the question of many that I ask in the book is, how does a United States with over 100 times as many people as it was when we first made the Constitution and so on, what is that incredible, 2 orders of magnitude of scale done to our ability to conduct government? And my answer to that is, it's almost completely ruined it. And that's why we see what's happening right now, not because the wrong people got elected or these guys are trying to fight with those guys politically or whatever. Yeah, sure, that's going on. But to me, those are symptoms, not causes. They are, I believe I'm watching a lot of tantrum and bad behavior and so on because people are under tremendous stress trying to get a system to keep working when we've worn it out. It's a brilliant system, don't get me wrong. The Constitution is a brilliant document. The United States is a great country. I'm not here to say it isn't. I'm saying pay attention. We're subjecting it to a load for which it was not designed. And
where does the optimism come in?
The optimism comes in, that's a good question. Because what I do look at is what's going on the local level. I'm saying, basically, if you just focus on what's happening in Washington, D.C., you're bound to be disappointed, because that's where the biggest failures are happening right now. The biggest successes are taking place on a much smaller level. And to go back to the example of that we did same-sex marriage all across the U.S., state by state by state in 11 years, was not, the federal government was Johnny-come-lately. They were at the very tail end of that change. The revolution is happening in the cities. in the villages, in the states sometimes. There are, I think that the sanctuary city movement is a positive thing. And here we have mayors influencing national immigration policy. Here are boards of selectmen who are saying, let's research putting solar panels on the roofs of our municipal buildings so we don't have to burn so much fossil fuel. If they make a lot of noise in Washington about, let's go back to coal, I'm sorry, it's too late for that. The horse is already out of the barn. Everybody already knows we don't want to do that.
And the action can actually take place in the smaller communities because of the scale that you're talking about.
They're more agile. You can make decisions more easily when you don't have to try and get agreement for 325 million people. That's really hard to get agreement from maybe 40,000 people in Arlington. Way much easier. You can move forward faster. Yes, it's still government. It takes its time. But in comparison, there is no comparison. We get to do things on nonprofits, informal groups, whatever, can act based on new information and new ideas much, much faster than the country as a whole can.
Well, thank you for leaving us on that positive note.
Well, sure.
Because those of us here in Arlington are trying to do that every day.
Yes.
Glenn's book is A Man Wearing a Dress, and he will be at Arlington Robbins Library on November 14th.
That's correct, 7 to 9 p.m.
7 to 9 p.m.
In the community
and
room.
He'll be doing signings, he'll be doing readings, and please stop by and wish him well
And there'll be copies
take a look
of
at the book.
There'll be copies of the book available there, or you can bring, if you bought one already, bring it with you and I'll sign it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.